Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you all. Like Camille said, my name is Raha, and I'm a student at UBC and also a volunteer with the Addictions and Concurrent Disorders group. And I'm really excited to engage in this conversation.
Hey, hi everyone, my name is Keerit. Like Camille said, I work for PCRS. I've been working in the shelter system as well as with youth for about 6 years now. So since university, just through and through. Yeah, I used to work with the lab as well. And so I'm happy to be back. And yeah, excited to speak to everyone.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here with you all. My name is Esme Stumborg. I'm a student at UBC. I'm also a peer facilitator and student engagement coordinator at UBC's student recovery community. So if you were there for the opening talks, you heard from Sarah Fujak, who is our founder and director of the student recovery community. So the student recovery community at UBC is a community for connection with students with lived and living experience of recovery, addiction, and substance use disorders. And it's a community created by and for students with living experience. So yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very grateful.
I also just wanted to add that I actually work in Vancouver. So I'm situated out of Broadway Youth Resource Center. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. On East Broadway in Fraser. And so I work out of there in Vancouver and yeah, out of a housing program. Should we be watching like the chats or?
No, I'll be moderating that. And you can just start sharing your slides.
I mean, does anyone have any questions to start, or should we just start talking about our experiences? Or Kimia, do you have a question to start us off maybe?
Sure. So I guess one of the questions that I was very interested in general, as youth kind of working in both academia and within the healthcare system with other youth, a lot of times, at least for me, it has definitely been challenging to continue on a day-to-day basis. There's a lot of fatigue, emotional fatigue that comes with our roles. So I think I was really interested in knowing kind of what keeps you going, how do you overcome these challenges, and how do you build resilience both for yourselves in this role and also with the youth that you're working with. So maybe we can start with that.
I can start. I think the biggest thing for me, like the biggest learning curve, when I first started in the shelter system, I was like a very big like yes man, and I was always just saying yes to everything and really overexerting myself. And I took on a lot of responsibility, but I also really like assigned my identity to my job, and so which wasn't very healthy. And so since then, I've learned to again like I can't take responsibility for a youth and their trajectory or their experience. Like I can only do so much in my position. And so for a long time, I used to really assign myself with that. And I would watch the youth kind of go in the up and downs. And when they were up, I was up. And when they were down, I was down. And long term, that's not great for my mental health and also for theirs. Because at the end of the day, I am a support worker. And we have to have those boundaries. And so boundaries are great. I learned them on the job. I learned that as I was going, but having those like strict boundaries between like, hey, I'm here to support you, but I am a worker at the end of the day. And I do finish my shift at this time. And I do need to go home and I do need to have a separation between my work life and my personal life. And so that's really helped to kind of make that more of a clear distinction. Also, I just have a really good team. So we debrief a lot. We talk a lot. So it's not very often that I'm bringing the things home with me. But yeah, I don't know if Esme or Raha have anything else to add.
I can hop in. I definitely echo Keerit's thoughts right there. I work remotely on a text platform, and so I don't have as much of a direct, it's all anonymous, the people that I talk with, but the issues that are brought up are still often quite heavy, and something that I've kind of learned in order to build resilience is not to internalize everything on the platform, especially a lot of the times conversations don't go well. I could be having a really great conversation with someone and all of a sudden they choose to stop the conversation, and so we end it. And that can be obviously disheartening to feel like you let someone down. But like Keerit said, I have to remind myself that it's not up to me to quote unquote save an individual. I'm there to support them, and just reminding myself of my role and what that entails. And yeah, definitely reaching out to my own support systems is really important. Debriefing with the team at Kids Help Phone is something that we always do, and it's really helpful. Engaging in a lot of acts of self-care after a conversation. So I always make sure to do something for myself, because that's the only way I'm able to like continue to show up for others. Yeah.
Yeah, great points, everyone. I absolutely agree. Self-care, debriefing. So something that's a bit unique about a peer facilitator role is that I am on campus with the people that I work with. I'm very close to them. We study together, we walk around together, we eat together. And so creating boundaries is incredibly difficult. And it's something that I am not perfect at by any means. And I'm still very much learning how to do. And being on the front lines of an opioid epidemic can be heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, because the people that I work with aren't just my peers, but they are my friends, and they reflect my own lived experience as well. And so learning how to navigate that has not been easy in any way. But the trade-off is that I can make people feel safe in my lived experience. And I can talk to people as a peer, one-on-one. But of course, that comes with its drawbacks. I don't have clear roles where my shift necessarily ends. Which of course comes with its benefits as well. I'm easy to reach out to, but it means that I have to take a lot of my own responsibility for my own wellness, which is really not easy. Something that I've found that helps me in my resilience is political action, actually, because when I feel like I am not seeing changes, I need to start fighting for those changes myself. And so sometimes that can feel really difficult because you're working on the front lines every day, and you don't necessarily have the energy to give to larger movements. But for me, if I'm not engaged in those larger movements, then I don't have hope. And hope to me is the foundation of resilience. And so the way that I create hope is by continuing to fight. And so, yeah, that's something that I would add to this conversation.
That's really amazing. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your experiences. And I definitely agree with all of your points from my own experiences as well. I definitely think that it's not always easy. And for myself, a lot of times I feel burnt out. I feel like I'm not providing as much support as I would like to. But I really liked what Raha mentioned about, if you're able to take some time for yourself and care for yourself, that's the only way that you would be able to show up for others as well. And I think that's a really important thing when working on the front lines, especially during a crisis like this. So thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences. We actually had a question come in from the audience about through your experiences, having discussions with youth, what are the services that are offered in your communities that you find are the most effective for the youth that you're working with?
I can start off the top of my head. So the services that, are drop-in friendly, that are, informal in the sense of, it's not as much of like a clinician setting. And, like there's, when there's no waiting list, for example, like I'll give you an example, like my youth, we very often, I don't know if anyone is familiar with Directions Youth Services in Vancouver, but we use Directions all the time. We're a housing program. There's not too much we can offer in terms of detox or withdrawal or whatever it may be. But we work with Directions, which is 24/7. And so if you need to go detox, they're right there. And, there's people that are working there with lived experience. It's a very social kind of chill atmosphere. It's not as clinical. And there's often they can try to get you in as quick as they can because it's kind of like a one-day thing, or it's like a MAP program. But environments like this, where it's run by people with lived experience, where it's a little bit less formal, where services are provided like on a drop-in basis, that's super low barrier for our youth to actually be able to engage in. And so those kinds of programs have the highest, I would say, participation, just because of the low barrier, the barriers of it. When it's hard for our youth to make appointments at a specific time, and then sometimes when they miss an appointment, they've got to wait 2 weeks again, and then maybe they lose their motivation within that time, right? And so in a perfect world, there wouldn't be any waiting lists, or there wouldn't be anything like that. But yeah, and I also, sorry, what kind of, no, yeah, I see that. What kind of data collections are used in our programs? I'm not too sure, except like we do, report all of our CIs and like everything that needs to be like reported to, like it obviously is, I think report to like MCFD and such. However, I'm not really involved in that, so that's a good question, but I don't know if anyone else can answer that one.
I'll tag in here and say that I definitely agree with Keerit on the low barrier aspect of it. I think accessibility is always a challenge when it comes to mental health. Anecdotally, something that comes up a lot in my conversations with youth is their frustration and like inability to access the care that they need from clinicians, psychiatrists, counseling. Financially, it can be really hard to afford something like therapy. So having options for them to reach out for support when they need it. For Kids Help Phone, it's special because you can get 24/7 help for free. So whether it's at 2 in the afternoon or 2 in the morning and you need to talk to someone, we're going to be there for the individual. And also, I think it's also helpful that it's anonymous. I think due to like social stigmatization of mental health, it can be really hard to open up to someone, especially a stranger, about something that's so stigmatized. So having that anonymity, I think, is definitely helpful in in making it more accessible for youth to reach out. And to throw some statistics out, 87% of the youth that reach out to us, they say that after their conversation, they're feeling less sad, less lonely, and better equipped to deal with their issue. So it's an effective measure for sure. Crisis lines.
Yeah, definitely. Great points already. Something that I would add to that too is just having people that look like you and sound like you is really important. Something that I've noticed is just the incredible amount of distrust there are for adults and kind of like professionals at large. And so having people who can kind of use your lingo, laugh at your jokes, kind of be a little bit edgy, that sort of thing, really puts students at ease, especially because university campuses are a very particular type of space. There aren't really other spaces where you are learning and working and eating and sleeping and socializing and now healing all in the same place. And there's a lot of youth who are concerned because of stigma about anonymity and about speaking, even going to university counselors, for example, even though that is kept private, just being in the same buildings or around the same buildings where they're also going to classes and they're seeing their professors walking around and people who are grading them and who are gatekeepers to like their academic success, it can make students really nervous. And so the number one thing I would say that has been so important for the student recovery community at UBC is having a physical space where students can come and be together in a community and also in their own time. So we talked about low barrier and accessibility. And so, yeah, just having a space where students can use their autonomy to drop in when they need to, and not always for a specific purpose either, but just being able to be around other students with lived and living experience of substance use issues and recovery. That's been integral to the success of the student recovery community, definitely.
I think I just wanted to add on to that because that's huge. Like youth having a safe place or a safe place, being able to go there without any like specific criteria, right? Like for example, we'll come into problems when like a youth wants to go to like a treatment program, but they're struggling a little bit with like concurrent disorder. So sometimes they'll be like, okay, if this is a mental health program, you need to figure out your substance use, right? Like come here once you're detoxed for however longer. And it's just like, no, but I need help with both of those things. And so they can kind of feel ostracized. And so having spaces that are just like, yo, come here for whatever you need, just drop in, come talk, like we can figure it out. There's no like set of criteria before you went to the door, as well as Esme, like how you mentioned the distrust of a lot of services. I mean, in my experience, the distrust of police, nobody really wants to go to the emergency room. A lot of the times when we're in situations, I've had kids that have, OD'd or adults that have OD'd and they do not want to go to the emergency room. They just refuse to. And so that's a huge barrier, obviously, in their care. But so now they don't have a good relationship with these services that we so, want to push. Like, oh my gosh, you need to go to detox or you need to go to treatment or you need to do this. But it's so clinical and they have no trust in that system. And so a lot of the time, there's not a lot of transitionary care in that. There's not a lot of continuum of care. And so there's not a lot of people that are supporting you step by step. You'll have a roots worker, you'll have a transitions worker, you'll have, an Indigenous cultural worker, but we're not all working together. And so you'll kind of go to one program for something, you'll go to one program for something else. And it's very fragmented. And so, yeah, having spaces where you can just come drop in and there's a lot of stuff available there. I mean, that's always best with low barriers, but.
Thank you all so much. These are all really, really incredible points. I definitely agree. It seems like, to me, accessibility, I think, is one of the biggest issues that are important to consider when it comes to addiction treatment, especially for youth. And I think how we approach trying to understand what accessibility actually means in order to make treatments more accessible, I think is very important. I think there's more than just looking at, what are the barriers to this program itself, but also considering the different individuals that are trying to access these programs in the system. How are their experiences different, and how are each of the services that we're providing actually accommodating to those specific experiences and needs of the youth? I think it's very important. So I really liked all the points that we touched on. I think all of them are really important in trying to expand on the individualization of these treatment programs and also their accessibility. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I think the next question that came up that I thought was really important was with regards to someone working in a large health authority who does not have lived experience and is not in a peer support role, how do you think they can best support and lift the voices of people with lived experiences or living experiences?
I'm just thinking it's actually a really good question.
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and not easy to answer. I would say it's already great just asking this question to begin with. So something that Sarah, the founder of the SRC, brought up in her introductory speech is that allyship is not a noun, it's an action verb, right? And so I think the biggest thing for me is not overemphasizing your own experience. Even if you have worked in the field for a long time, nothing can replace lived experience. And even within that, there are so many different types of lived experience that anytime we're starting to speak for people, it's going to silence others, and it's going to take up more space than is needed. And so I think it's a lot of maybe like rhetorical positioning, kind of just opening that space and really positioning yourself as a person who doesn't understand, but is wanting to learn.
Yeah, thank you for that, Esme. I think too, like, diversify your resources, right? Like diversify where you're getting your information or from. Like what authors are you reading, right? Are you acknowledging the cultural perspectives that maybe come into your line of work, right? And are you relying on educators within that field to educate you? Like, I mean, a lot of the times in university, like even in research, I'd be surprised that like we'd be talking about so much clinical stuff, right? Like in the lab, and like, oh yeah, like, well, the study says this and the research says this, but half the time there's like not even the perspective of of someone with lived experience. It's just scholars and academics talking about what they think the lived experience is. And that was a big shock for me coming into like a little bit of research and stuff. And so I think that the biggest thing is you need to really like check yourself, like where are you getting your information from? Who are you speaking to? Who's in your circle? Who are you giving space to? Kind of like with Esme, like, okay, if a lot of the times, we don't have much to add to the conversation, but we can sit here and act as a sponge, and we can look at ourselves, and we can also challenge our own biases. I think that's a really big thing, to be able to look at yourself and challenge your own bias within your work, because we all have them. And so it's more of like a self thing, more of a, like what you can do externally. I think, because there's a lot of stuff that we've been taught, or that we've been, going on through life with, that we haven't realized it's a bias, and we haven't realized it's actually a barrier to us providing safe care. So I would say, check yourself.
I'll add on to that and just say that those are such good answers, and I completely agree. I actually work with UBC Peer Support, and we got allyship training from the SRC, which was incredible. And some of the things I kind of took away from that conversation was, like Keerit was just saying, to kind of check yourself and reevaluate your own beliefs about substance use and addiction. And you can do this on your own, but also towards those around you. So educate those around you that might be engaging in these biases. Work to reduce language that is stigmatizing as well is really important. And yeah, just not even, I guess it's effective, but also in terms of like creating space. So offering your unconditional support to someone who needs it, and giving them space, creating space for them to talk about something and make their own informed decision is really important. And also to do work if you have the capacity to, whether this be like volunteering, signing a petition, attending a protest, donating to underfunded resources. Like those are all ways that you can offer a helping hand if you're able to. So yeah,
we can use our privilege to highlight the experiences of others. And I think like working within a large health authority, like, you know, great, like you're in a great space there where you can bring in. I think a lot of times, you know, it's very one-sided. At least a lot of our youth feel like that, right? And so if you have a position where you can instead just embrace and highlight other people's experience, wonderful. You're doing a great job. Like that's what we need, right? So yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. These were all really great responses to that question. The next question I think might be more for Esme about other post-secondary institutes in BC looking to replicate the UBC model for peer support, or if any work has been done in high school settings that are similar that anyone might know of.
Yeah, so I'm not too familiar about this, but I know that Sarah is in the chat. So Sarah, if you want to add some information, please go ahead. In BC, I'm not sure about, but I know that there are several university campuses across Canada that are starting to replicate the SRC model. In high school, I haven't heard anything about, but I think it's a really important place for this to be happening as well. And I wish that this was something that I could have connected with when I was in high school, because it was something that I needed.
I'll also jump in here and say that I think, Tammy, you're referring to AMS Peer Support, maybe, if that's what you're referring to. I'll just explain what it is. So I'm a volunteer with Peer Support as well. And what we do is we offer peer support for student staff who need it. And it's a confidential service where you can book a session with a fellow student on campus, and you kind of just talk about what's on your mind. And I think it's an important and kind of underutilized service on campus. And yeah, Sarah's saying that there are several post-secondaries creating their own versions of the SRC, which is amazing. I'm not entirely sure about peer support being replicated. I'm sure that it is replicated across different universities, but I think it should be more emphasized towards high school, because that was something that I graduated 5 years ago, and it definitely wasn't a thing back then. And I'm hoping in the future it will be, because it's necessary. Yeah.
I mean, I don't work at the schools and such, but in our drop-in centers, so like at BYRC and stuff, like we do have some peer support programs. And I mean, like they work, the proof is in the pudding, right? And so, yeah, I would love to see it. It's kind of like, you know, why give peer support programs when everyone's like at their worst, right? Like if I had known that like a peer support program was even a thing in university, like I didn't even know. That I think would have changed a lot of things for me. And so, yeah, I'm excited to see what that looks like for in the future.
All right, thank you so much. So I think there was a question that came in that I'm not sure I understand, but I will read it out as it is. So someone asked that quite often the youth who are dealing with substance use and mental health disorders have adults in their lives who are unknowingly instrumental in contributing to or keeping their youth where they are at. Do you involve adult services for substance affected as a part of your care to youth?
This is a good question. So in housing, I mean, we focus on just, you know, the youth housing aspect part, but you do need to obviously recognize a lot of our youth are disconnected socially, right? Like they don't have the strongest of support systems, whether that's due to intergenerational trauma, whether that's due to, you know, some other issues in the family. It's difficult to support a youth that, yeah, has that lack of connection and that maybe isn't a healthy connection. A lot of the times when I'm speaking to a youth, their only healthy support system is their workers, right? So it's like me and is you know, whoever else they're connected to. And at the end of the day, like that has boundaries, right? Like we're just workers and we're unfortunately we're unable to be that family. And then when you look at who they're connected with, a lot of the times there's very toxic relationships. And so I think you're right, because usually, you know, that's what's kind of holding them down. And so, you know, the family doesn't necessarily, you know, they may not be supportive to the youth's recovery. And so a lot of the times our youth, before they even think about treatment or recovery or whatever, they have to heal from their relationship with their parents or their siblings. And that may mean that they can no longer continue a relationship. That may not be the case, because I do think that we need to invest a lot more in reconnecting our families, especially our Indigenous families. But with that being said, there are cases where our youth at that point in time, in order to continue on with their recovery and their healing, they need to be able to remove themselves from those toxic situations sometimes. And unfortunately, that may mean the adults in their life. And you know, have to kind of learn how to reinforce in new relationships or whatever it may be. But yeah, I am curious though, as to, like, I would find that we need more youth specific treatment programs. I mean, like when youth go into treatment programs, adults, a lot of the times they leave, like they don't stay, right? And so I think there needs to be a little bit of tackle it independently a little bit first, and then, you know, see if we can reintegrate them back. But there needs to be a lot of focus on that continuum of care, because you don't see the reintegration a lot. So I can talk a lot of smack, but a lot of times these things aren't happening, right? But it's nice to kind of say it out loud or write it out on paper. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
Yeah, just in terms of on-campus resources. So we do allyship training, which I think is really important for professors and administrators. So for instance, even like career counselors or advisors, having advisors who are informed, like trauma informed, is something maybe that people wouldn't really think about. It's like, oh, you're just here to talk about your grades or talk about your course selection. But this is an extremely sensitive topic for students in recovery who are often taking time off school, who are in and out of school, who have to withdraw from classes, who have continuous extenuating circumstances. And oftentimes they're walking into offices of people who are not understanding their history and are not very sensitive to it. And so allyship training goes really far in all aspects of university life. And there exists a lot of stigma in classrooms. You'd be surprised by people who should really know better, who are doing the research, who are teaching on topics that you would think that they would be informed about this, yet are still using incredibly stigmatizing language. Yeah, it's really unfortunate to see, but all of those things build onto each other to create like a recovery hostile environment for students. And it's so easy for students then to walk away with the idea that university is not meant for them, that they are too much, that they'll never get through it. And so, yeah, allyship training in every aspect for every step of the way in university, and talking to all of the adults, not just parents in people's lives, but all of the adults that they encounter, because they really are kind of gatekeepers to their professional success. And so if we don't have allies in every aspect of university, then students with substance use issues and lived and living experience of addiction are going to continue to be marginalized.
Wow, I think these are some really powerful points. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. And I definitely agree with needing more allies in the university system, because, you know, I mean, we've all been through university, at least from my own experiences, everything with the academics support individuals that are available to you. All they talk about is do you meet the requirements to go to year 2? Do you meet the requirements to graduate? Whereas, and I actually vaguely remember a friend of mine who had missed maybe one class that was a requirement for a really big career plan that she had. And she just had forgotten about it and did not realize. And there was virtually no support as to an alternative path that she can take to still reach that. So the answer that was given was, oh no, this is done, that's it. Like, you can go try and figure it out in like a community college setting if you want, but we don't have any like alternative ways here for you to do that. So that was just like a very simple example of something that happened. But when I saw that, I realized, I mean, youth that are experiencing so many hardships at this very vulnerable point in their life and still are choosing to show up to school at this very difficult time, and to just be turned away when something goes wrong is not support in any way, shape, or form. So that's very, very unfortunate. And I completely agree that that is something that needs to change at the system level. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. So the next question that came through was, is peer support something that can be established in a youth center? And I actually want to rephrase that as to sort of more, how can we establish peer support in a youth center instead of, is it something that can be established? Because I think this way we can kind of brainstorm some ways that we can bring in peer support into a community setting. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
I mean, there's youth support in a lot of different capacities, right? Like there's youth support in cultural and Indigenous care. So like, for example, we have some peer support workers that connect specifically with youth to maybe do some, Indigenous specific related activities, or maybe we have peer support workers in mental health, or peer support workers in substance use. Like there's all different types of peer support workers, but in our program, at least, we it's kind of like a graduation program. Like you'll kind of work with us for a little bit, for a couple of years. As long as you're attending our drop-ins, we see your face, you're engaged with us during the day. Given I work during the night, so I don't actually see a lot of this happen. I just hear about it at night. But you come in, and you're engaging with us, and then ideally, it's pretty much like we have a program, and you can apply to kind of be peer support in whatever kind of category you'd like to work in, or even if you just want to be in the resource room and just kind of help connect youth. But it's really like, the point of it is to be low barrier, right? There are a couple of like criteria. So like, okay, maybe, you've had stable housing for, however long, you're working, maybe like, you're on some kind of right track where now you're in a position where you can help influence and maybe inspire some other youth that maybe were like you just a couple of years ago, or just a couple of months ago. And so I think the really cool thing about it is that, peer support programs can be so flexible, and they can be literally whatever you make them. And I mean, yeah, like they're great, because I think, kind of echoing the conversation just earlier about like, I mean, even in my position, the fact that I'm younger and I'm a youth on the front lines, that helps me out tremendously, because I'm able to connect with the youth way differently than maybe, my coworker who is a part of an older generation. And so peer support, even then, that has like sometimes I'll say something to a youth and they just don't get it, but like a peer support worker that's like, they're just like, dude, you've been through everything I've been through. They get it right away when they speak to a peer support worker. So I think there's a lot of flexibility in how you can do it. And yeah, I see that. Sorry, I'm trying to read this as well. But yeah, I see that you're brand new to your position. And so honestly, like, just go for it. Put out a call for interest in the community for anyone that maybe has lived experience. And yeah, you can really just make it whatever you want, to be honest, based on what your needs are specifically for your center. But yeah, I don't know if Esme probably or Raha has anyone.
Yeah, something I would love to add to that. I think conversations around peer support from people who have lived and living experience, it's often centered around what we can do for people who are seeking help. And I think we miss the conversation of like what peer support does for the people, for the peer supporter themselves, because it's an incredible step. So I kind of graduated to then being able to help others. And it was huge for my own recovery. And I think this should be a tool that is used for people in recovery, because coming from a place where I was not trusted for a long time and I had no responsibility, was not able to take on responsibility, to then slowly being trusted and being able to take on responsibility and to be able to support people was just tremendous for my own self-confidence, and really cemented myself in my recovery, and was just, I mean, actually life-changing, of being able to be the person that I needed a couple of years ago. It kind of creates the full circle. And I think we really miss out on an important conversation when we don't remember that that is a step in recovery as well, that should be used as a tool for people, because it's just incredibly useful.
That is such a good point. Thank you so much, Esme.
Okay, just a second. I'm reading the next question that came through. Okay, so thank you so much. I thought those are some really good points. So this next question, I haven't read it yet, so I'll just read over it. They're asking about allyship training in non-university contexts. Would you ever consider community-based, I suppose, allyship training? And this person works at Directions, and one thing I see, or they see in their role as a housing and life skills worker, is university is seen as extremely distant and inaccessible to youth. Do you think that SRC would ever consider coming to community resources and talking about post-secondary education as a safer and more accessible place for youth who use drugs? Really good question.
Thank you so much. That was so great. First of all, we love Directions. Sorry, oh my God, I did want to bring up, well, maybe we can talk about this later, but sorry to hear about the youth detox. If anyone's familiar, the Directions Youth Detox, they've pulled their funding, which is very frustrating, but it was a great program. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. Do you think? I think so, like, absolutely. I think there are a lot of, because good point. I think, yeah, I do not work with a lot of youth that go to post-secondary. I do not work with a lot of youth that, yeah, like are in university spaces or in college spaces. And so to have allyship training in community-based centers is huge. And I think there are concerted efforts, right? Like maybe nothing that's super successful just yet, but like in BYRC specifically, we play around with a lot of different programs, a lot of different things that we offer. And I believe that one of them, specifically, we have like an LGBTQ allyship, or LGBTQ two-spirited allyship, program where, again, I haven't actually been to it, but I've heard about it. And so there's a little efforts, but I wouldn't say that I'm familiar with an SRC kind of similar based program that's being offered in community-based training. Would I love to hear about it and would I love to push it? Yes. Is there anything that's super successful in that just yet? Not that I've heard of. Would I like to see it? Yes, hopefully. But yeah, I think there are little efforts, but nothing that's been really picked up yet. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just speak to this as well. So the SRC at the moment is really focused on-campus recovery. And you're absolutely right. There are massive barriers to even being a university student. I work with a very specific demographic of people that are not representative of youth at large in any way. And I think part of the issue is that we are dealing with so many gaps at the moment. And the SRC is really trying to focus on filling the gap for students who aren't seeing themselves in off-campus resources at the moment. And so I think one thing that we are doing right now is just trying to make it obvious to prospective students that the SRC exists. So when students who have lived and living experience of substance use issues, when they are deciding, or if they decide to pursue post-secondary education, that they can very easily see UBC as a safe place to land for them, and that they have a community that they can connect to easily. As for outreach in the larger community, unfortunately, that's just not where we're at right now. We're still a very small community, building through mostly volunteers. But I think it is important that that we start bridging that gap as well, because not only are students going to be moving into university and need to know that that resource exists, but then of course students graduate and they move out of the community that we're trying to build. And so making those transitions easier is definitely, you know, on the agenda. But yeah, it's all in the works. But thank you for that question.
I think this is difficult to answer because our services are so fragmented, right? We have so many different organizations that are offering such wonderful programs, but like, you know, it's just, okay, it's just a 5-bed program and it's, you know, this random organization that I've never heard of, but they're getting funding from VCH, but I've only just heard about them. And, you know, okay, well, the youth will leave this program and now we have to connect them to another program, but it's a completely different organization. And so I think this is kind of just talking to like the bigger picture as to, yeah, how much there is. There are gaps in service, right? And I think allyship training can be kind of included in that, because half the time, you know, a center is offering this, but maybe they don't get enough engagement, they don't get enough, you know, or I don't know, they don't get enough participation, and then it closes down and it's like, I never even heard about it. And so that's kind of the difficult thing too, is like, there's no continuum of care for like, hey, go here, then go here, then go here. Everyone just kind of trying to do their own thing with what they have. Right. And so we need to definitely work on, I think, you know, more centralized services and such, so that we do have a little bit of greater visibility as to what is available. But, you know, we can just cross our fingers and hope that we're working in that direction. But, yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. These are all really, really important and great points. I especially really do agree with the needing a more centralized system, Keerit, because I think that's, especially for youth, I think that's where a lot of treatment discontinuation and loss within the system is happening, because there is no kind of stepwise approach as to, especially for youth who have multiple psychiatric conditions in addition to substance use disorder. There's just a lot of, you know, first treat that and then go somewhere else and treat something else, but then the other thing comes back because the symptoms of the other psychiatric disorder hasn't been addressed yet. So I think there's definitely a lot of issues in that area that needs to be addressed, and for sure it has been an ongoing topic of discussion. So I think it's very important to start taking some steps towards that as well. Thank you so much for sharing those points. So I think the next question that I had was, how do you overcome in your roles, how do you overcome cultural and communication barriers with the youth that you meet? Yeah.
I think the biggest thing, it's like, before going into this role, I need to be very comfortable with who I am, you know, what my story is, what I stand for, like what my values are, because the youth is going to bounce off of that, right? And I think too, like, I'm aware of my skills and I'm also aware of my boundaries and how much I can really do. And so there has been situations where I've recognized that maybe I am not the best worker right now to work with this specific youth, because, you know, maybe we have a cultural disconnect, or maybe we have some kind of communication barrier. And so a lot of the times, like, first things first, I rely on my team. And that's the biggest thing. Like, we have a very, very diverse team, which I'm really grateful for. Like, we've got people just from all over the world, just people, you know, that have done all sorts of different things. And so first things first, I have a diverse team, which I can, you know, rely on. And I think too, like, I'm I think Esme kind of talked a little bit about this too, but like informal services are the best services. So I'm informal. I will tell you a little bit about myself. I will also validate and acknowledge, like, to be honest, I don't walk around the elephant in the room, right? We validate and we acknowledge that, hey, there's a lot of differences between us. And I actually like don't know what you've gone through, but this is like a little bit of, you know, this is a little part of me, and like to build that trust. Also to rely on, like, a lot of my job is connecting the youth with their day workers. And so like a lot of my job at night is to be like, okay, well, what do you have available to you? You know, like your roots worker, like, great, I know that you're ignoring them. I know that you are, you know, avoiding going to your appointments. Well, maybe I can be the conduit to make you access these day services. You know, like I can, you know, maybe take you to an appointment. I can call them with you. I can do all these things. And so I really just realized that my position is just a middleman, and I can just help as long as I check myself and I have those honest conversations with you. I can just help connect you to things, right? And so overcoming those communication and cultural barriers, sometimes it ain't you. Sometimes you gotta, you know, sometimes you gotta pass it on to another worker. And sometimes it's just, yeah, be open and honest, share a little bit about yourself, and then see where it goes. But yeah, I'm not the be all end all. I've just got to help you get to who can help you. So
I can hop in here and say that for me, this is kind of a tricky question, just because Kids Help Phone is a service that's online, and it's offered in English, French, and there is, I believe, Arabic services on the phone through an interpreter. So it's not like the most. Also, another facet of it is that you pretty much get matched to a crisis responder. You don't know their background, they don't know yours, so there's not much of like a space to connect culturally with the youth that we're dealing with. It's more, what crisis are you dealing with? How can I help you? And that's not necessarily always ideal for the youth that we're talking to. A lot of the times, you want to talk to someone who understands your experience, right? So that's definitely something that I think is challenging, and it's complex, but it's important. Something important also is equitable care for Indigenous youth in particular. And Kids Help Phone implemented an action plan in 2019 where they developed a program called Finding Hope that was led by their Indigenous Advisory Council. So it's kind of just a holistic approach to ensuring that Indigenous youth are receiving help that's equitable, and recognizing that like mental health is connected to so many different aspects of a young person's life. So there's like economic opportunities, employment, access to health, and like education, their connection to their land and culture. Like if they live in a rural setting, like how can they get the help that they need? So I think that was a really important step to ensuring that there's more cultural awareness and equitable care in terms of Kids Help Phone. But I think there's always room to improve in terms of languages that are offered at crisis centers. There's really only English and French is in high demand. There's not that many bilingual crisis responders, to be honest. So I think there's definitely room for improvement. Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely a big question. I mean, they've all kind of been big questions, but I'm glad it was brought up. And it's something that I have definitely encountered in my role so far. And I think something that's really wonderful about the SRC, and you know, being able to watch this community be built from the ground up is that students have direct influence over what kind of services we provide. And so that's really empowering for people. Like, if there is a gap, let's build something. Like, we can do that. Let's do that together. What do you want to see? And let's make that happen. And so like a constant feedback loop is really important, of actually like knowing who you're providing services to and what they actually need. On top of that, I am a believer that, you know, talking is not the be all end all. There are ways to support that aren't through like direct communication as well. And again, I think the SRC is quite a unique place for this, because you know, just sitting with people and being able to study beside them or eat a meal together is a type of support that you can't really find elsewhere. But that connection is so important. And so, yeah, just really, you know, finding those intersections and being able to provide services for them, because yes, students with lived experience and addiction is one intersection, but we within that are not a homogenous group whatsoever. And pretending that we are is only going to be to our detriment. So as Keerit said, you know, facing those things head on, not shying away from them, verbalizing them, and working through it together. Yeah, that's basically the foundation of it.
I think that was such a good point, Esme, especially. It's like, you know, the youth that we work with, they're not just, you know, their mental health or their substance use, right? Like not every conversation has to be surrounded by like, oh my gosh, how am I going to help you? How are you going to get clean? Oh my God. You know, like we're not, you know, there to be there just to be like, okay, clinical, formal, like blah, blah, blah. Sometimes connecting with the youth is just like, hey, let's watch your favorite show on Netflix. Or like, hey, like you're into graphic design, like, great, why don't you show me? And then eventually we can work on some vocational training, or we can, you know, it doesn't always have to be like, okay, how can I fix your, okay, well, if you don't have anything productive to talk about, like, don't, you know, it's overcoming those cultural and communication barriers. I think the biggest thing is like, you have to focus on that human connection first, right? More so than, you know, your job and your job description. It's like, okay, well, you've been through some shit, you know, so have I, great. Maybe not the same stuff, but like, maybe we can reach like a middle spot, and that can be through other things, not always just, you know, the topic at hand. So yeah, good point.
There's some really, really great points. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. And I see that we are almost out of time, but there was a really important question that came through, so I will read it out, but maybe we can just touch on it. So someone asked that they are new to a young parenting agency where all youth are pregnant or parenting, and they have found that substance use is a very difficult topic to navigate, as many youth are worried about CAS involvement. Do you have any suggestions for how, as an agency, they can better support pregnant or parenting youth?
This is such a good question. And whoever, yeah, like, I will say, if anyone wants to, I'll put in my email, or, you know, if anyone wants to talk more about these things, I would love to after this. But what a great question. There's a lot of ways to answer that. That's messy. It's very, very messy. We do have some youth that stay with us that are pregnant. We have a couple of youth right now living in laneway houses with their toddlers. And so every situation is unique. And I think when you have young parents, the last thing we want to happen is for them to be separated from their youth. I mean, we've seen that happen time and time again, and we don't want to be instrumental in that. And so, I mean, each case is different, but I mean, connecting with that youth's familial supports, if they have any, who do they have around them? Can we assist them in going to detox and or treatment, you know, for a short time being, knowing where they're, you know, being able to maybe take care of that transition for them. Like if they've had their child, are we able to assist them in that transition and maybe helping them, you know, place that child in someone else's care, someone that they trust, right? Like just being able to be their advocate in it all, because at the end of the day, sometimes, you know, we definitely have youth right now in our housing program that have their children that do not have access to their children right now. And they're trying to kind of get back to that. And so we can support them in going to treatment and going to withdrawal, keeping them accountable, connecting them with their partner, who know if they're a good or bad influence. That's always another conversation. You know, anyone that they're connected to in the community. And then youth that live with us that have their children, we're constantly checking in, like we're there to support. Sometimes our youth do slip up, you know, and so we have to be very careful with the way that we approach that. And we're very honest with our conversations as to what our responsibilities are in the program and what, at the end of the day, our priorities to take care of them and their child, right? But I would like to have, you know, maybe we can talk about this a little bit more later. If you want to email me, whoever answered the question. I do have a lot of opinions, but I don't have a lot of time. So I would just say, yeah, everything is different. Every situation is different. See who they have in their circles, see who you can rely on, see who you can connect them with. Because yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is we don't want them to lose their child, but we do have responsibilities in our job. And so it's difficult to balance. I don't know if anyone else wants to comment. This is a hard question to answer. Oh, I just saw Calgary has a program. Yeah, and so there are some programs too, which is I've heard where youth can attend day treatment with their kids. That's another thing. That's another big one where you can take your kid to day treatment. And so it's not a residential, it's like an outpatient program where you can take your child and you can kind of go to these day treatments where they have programs and they'll have childcare with you for you. However, it's great that Calgary has that. There are a couple here, but I wouldn't say they're overly utilized. And so I think that's another program that we could definitely invest in, is having more programs where you can bring your kids with you. Because I mean, at the end of the day, we want everyone to be a family, right? So yeah, day treatments are good, but.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Keerit. So I see that we're unfortunately out of time. If everyone, I see two of our speakers have already put in their email. So the speaker emails are there, and this session was recorded, and I believe the recordings will be uploaded on Huva or somewhere for your access. So hopefully you can visit that as well. I want to again thank you so much, everyone, our speakers and our attendees, for engaging in such meaningful discussion today. I learned a lot personally. It was a really, really valuable session for me, and I hope it was the same for most of you as well. Yeah, our keynote session will start in about 10 minutes. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you for moderating, Kimia.
Yes, thanks, Kimmy.